Hello everybody. I'm assuming you can hear me and see me. I can see that some people are joining here. I'm just going to make some small talk while I see people joining here. Hello, okay, Kim's here. She says hello. So that's great, I can see your comments. So as I talk, if you want to ask any questions, hopefully I can see the questions and answer. So let me get right to it. Welcome to DJD's live Instagram feed. Today is International Jazz Day, so Artistic Director Kimberly Cooper asked me to come on Instagram here and talk a little bit about jazz music, and how we work with Decidedly Jazz, and talk about our show that we're supposed to be doing right now. So yeah, let's start with that. Right now we would be in the middle of a run of Beautiful Noise, which was a new production created by Kimberly Cooper. And as you all know, you're all in a similar situation. We were unable to put on the production, and it's been postponed to next year. So yeah, that's sad, and a lot of people are going through these types of things. In our case, artists, musicians, dancers, actors, basically what we do has shut down, and that's tragic. But we will carry on. And for those of you that don't know me, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Rubim de Toledo, and I've been off and on the musical director for Decidedly Jazz since approximately 2007. I've worked with Kim creating shows. I think this is my Beautiful Noise would have been is either 11th or 12th show as musical director and composer and bassist with Decidedly Jazz. A lot of people ask, and I thought I could talk about this right off the bat, is what the sort of creative process is between myself as a musical director and Kim Cooper as the choreographer and artistic director when we put a show together. Basically, I mean, like I said, we've done many shows, so each one's a little bit different, but our process usually starts with a conversation regarding, I'll sit down and Kim will tell me what she has in mind as far as any artistic choices. This could be, or I think what's important to me to get an idea of right away is if there's any sort of genre or era that we're talking about, because at that point I'll start to fabricate in my mind the musical landscape. Is it something modern? Contemporary? Is it something that takes place in the past, in the 20s, or something based around that? Is it something fantasy that could be anything? Is it futuristic, or what are we talking about? That starts to dictate musically where I might go. And then she might tell me about sort of the plot or the characters or the stories, and she'll mention maybe music that she's been inspired by or been listening to. And at that point, I might take all that information and just go home and start recording or writing, recording demos and sending her things. And once I send her a few things and we talk and she tells me what she likes and what is going in the right direction, I can kind of fine tune where we're going, and go back and forth a little bit until we have some concrete ideas. Once we have some pretty good ideas, I will get the band together, and I'll meet at DJD with Kim, and we'll play just the musicians and her, probably over 2 days, and make some music and record it all. And then we leave Kim with all this material to listen to. And what's great about that is that we are dealing in the jazz realm, so there, while things are composed and somewhat structured, there are a lot of elements of improvisation that can still happen. And in these demos, these improvisational elements get captured. Now that could be great, and it could be dangerous, because as jazz musicians, we like a certain amount of freedom to express ourselves and to get artistic. And sometimes we just can't remember what we did, so we don't want to try to do it again. But yeah, that happens where we'll just be playing something that's completely improvised, and Kim will be like, I love that. And at that point, we have to go back and figure out what it is we played and try to duplicate that, which is also dangerous. Trying to duplicate something that was initially improvised, you might not capture the same energy again. But we do our best, and hopefully what we try to do is have some structures and a sort of a flow, and then leave spaces where the improvisation musically can happen. So that's, in a nutshell, what happens, and we go back and forth, and literally things get tweaked and changed, and a couple bars get added here, and a transitional thing gets added there, and the tempo gets changed a little bit here and there until literally opening night. Even at that point, things may change a little bit. And what's great about working with DJD as a musician, besides the great dancing and all the great dancers and the infrastructure that decidedly jazz has to support art and dance, and of course live music, which is in their mandate. One of the great things about working with DJD is that we do have this flexibility to experiment on stage at the moment, and things happen, and we're watching the dancers, and every night it could be very different. Certain things have to stay the same. Hopefully they do. Certain things may kind of derail a little bit, and we fix it, and that's always scary but exciting too. And that's basically our process in general. Now for our this show that we're supposed to be doing right now, Beautiful Noise, to talk a little bit about that, we Kim and I had sat down, and we were just throwing creative ideas back and forth, and musical ideas, just in conversation, not even really thinking about a show. And I think I mentioned the idea of ostinato, which is a musical term that I'll explain in a second, but I think that sort of resonated with Kim a little bit, and she just went off into her own world about what that idea is. And what ostinato is, really in very basic terms, is just repetition, or a repetitive riff. Now, it's very useful in music for a lot of reasons, and we all hear it all the time, and we may not even be aware of it, and it might seem like such a simple and inconsequential element, but it's actually very important, because traditionally or historically in ancient times of music, ostinato has been used to create sort of a meditative state, or even a trance state, or to incite dance. So you may imagine just sort of music that you might have listened to that's just kind of like this simmering, repetitive thing that doesn't change very much and goes on and on and on. And you can see how that kind of carries you away into the music, or you kind of forget your surroundings, or maybe you're not even aware of the music anymore. And the longer you do that, you sort of get into this other mental state. So musicians and composers and improvisers use that to create those effects. And this show, Beautiful Noise, was going to play on that on a lot of different levels. So just to play a little bit, I'll play you one of the riffs that was going to be a piece. Now, be aware this just is the bass line of the piece. You're not hearing the rest. But the bass line is the ostinato, which as a bass player, that's why ostinato is a very profound musical device. And on the bass, or the low end or the low frequency instrument of the ensemble typically is the instrument that provides most of the ostinato. In this particular piece that I'm going to play the bass for, there are several ostinatos happening in the drums and in the percussion and the bass, and they overlap, and they're in different time signatures, and they kind of move in and out of phrasing with each other, which is sort of the beauty of this ostinato thing, which I want to talk about in a second here. But I'll play you the riff. So on. So this will go on in the bass for minutes and minutes and minutes at a time. But what is great, or what is profound about an ostinato, is that I'm doing my best to play that exactly the same all the time. But I'm human, so that's almost impossible. So what happens is that there are little micro variations happening. So to someone that's not paying attention, or who's not aware, or who doesn't want to be aware, they may not notice that. But within this repetition, if you listen closely enough, you will start to hear sort of little things that change. Like for maybe the timing is changing slightly, or maybe certain notes, one note is louder and the next one is softer, or maybe the timbre changes. There's a brighter note or a darker note. So while it sounds very repetitive, the deeper you listen, the more you discover. So I'll play this again, and maybe, I'm not sure how well the sound is here, but maybe you can sort of hear these micro variations. And so forth. And now, really, imagine doing this for 2 minutes nonstop, or 5 minutes, or 12 minutes. At that point, you really start to lose yourself as a listener and as a musician. And what's even more special about this is that once you add other instruments doing the same thing, they may all be repetitive, but these layers are alive within themselves, interacting. And that is sort of the beauty of when you think about a West African percussion ensemble, for example. You may have several drummers playing at one time. And what they're playing individually could be quite simple. A couple notes here, a couple hits of a drum there, a repetitive bell pattern. And they don't sound like much until you put them together. And then they become this incredible groove that we know in West African music. The same thing goes for Afro-Cuban music and Brazilian music. You have lots of these layers of percussion that play together. That same idea exists in contemporary popular music. Like if you look at a James Brown groove, for example, you might have a really repetitive bass line, 2 repetitive guitar parts, and a drum groove that don't change very much, and they just simmer. And this groove goes and goes and goes, and you kind of get lost in this. And then James Brown has the freedom to do his thing over top. So there's a lot of depth that can go on in this idea of ostinato, which is what we are trying to capture musically in the show. But ostinato can be difficult to play, surprisingly, because you think, oh, it's so repetitive, that's easy. But there's a couple things that come to mind that make it difficult. So the first thing is just that if I have to play this bass line nonstop for 8 minutes, that's very physically taxing. And on. So that's like 8 seconds. So if I have to do that for 8 minutes, my hands are going to start, my arms and forearms are going to start to cramp up, my fingers are going to start to get sore. So you have to kind of deal with the physical elements of playing that. And that's a point that I want to get to quickly here too. Another element that's dangerous or difficult about ostinato, that is, it's easy to get bored as a musician. So I might be playing this and I might think, oh, this is boring. I'm just doing the same thing and nobody cares. I'm gonna I bring attention to myself. So that might sound cool, but it's not what we're trying to do, because the second I bring attention to myself, you lose that meditative state. Because you're like, oh, what's that? And that's the point. The point is to kind of allow the listener or even the dancer to just lose themselves in the music. So you don't want to add variations. And that's difficult for musicians because, especially I would say inexperienced musicians, maybe younger musicians, they just want to show off, or they want to, look what I can do, and then you're stuck doing this thing. But the more, very mature musicians and a mature ensemble knows how their part fits into the interlocking elements of the music, like those West African drummers. They don't think about themselves individually, they think about the ensemble. So that's, an element that we're trying to convey in this music. Another thing that is a danger or a difficulty in doing this repetitive ostinato idea, and this is one of the things that Kim really is a focal point in this show as well, is that it's easy to lose focus mentally and you start to think about other things. So I might be playing and then, I'm getting sore. Oh, my arms. And now I'm thinking about the physical element of this, and I'm not thinking about the music anymore. Or I'm not thinking about the piece or the dance anymore. And that's a danger. Or I might start daydreaming. Because this is easy, I'm just doing this. But I start thinking about, well, what are we going to do after the show? Oh, or maybe I had an argument with someone in my family or a friend, or your mind starts to wander. And that's one of the things that Kim wanted to kind of get across in this show as well, is the idea of what the artists, the dancers and the musicians are thinking while they're performing. Because as most of you know, as an artist or a performer, you're trying to capture the moment and you're trying to be true to your artistic expression, and you're trying to have this free-flowing, creative moment. But on stage, that actually doesn't happen that often. You're very often distracted about things. There's a weird light, or there's someone in the audience that's doing something weird, or something's happening in the wing, or you're sore. Like, it can happen to musicians, but imagine dancers. Often dancers are performing with pain, things like that. So a lot of things can distract you from that true artistic moment, and that's one of the things that Kim is trying to express in this show. So I've talked a lot, I played a little bit. I don't know if anyone's posted any questions that they had about this. I can kind of see little comments flying by here. If anyone does have a question, post it quickly. I did want to talk about one other thing, getting away from this show a little bit, but talking about jazz in itself. Today is International Jazz Day, and that's why I'm here talking today. I wanted to talk about sort of the creative process of a jazz musician, which, I mean, that's a big subject, but I'm going to narrow it down. The essence of jazz music really is improvisation. So if I could briefly just talk about how some jazz musicians approach improvisation, or maybe how I approach improvisation. It's actually funny because myself and a lot of the musicians I know, when we practice improvisation, we don't really improvise that much. And what I mean by that is we need to work out certain skills that free us up to be able to improvise. So if I wanted to take that riff that I was playing, and let's say now I wanted to get away from the ostinato, and now it was going to feature the bass, or the bass was going to be a key voice in the ensemble, and I was going to improvise a little bit, I might do something like this. So I kind of needed to have an idea of what I was improvising. I never thought of what I was going to play before I did that. But over time, I had worked out certain skills that allowed me to do that. So quite quickly here, firstly, I needed to know what sounds or notes I wanted to draw from. And my riff has these notes. So those notes, so I know I have those notes to work with. So that's, in musical terms, that's called a pentatonic scale. So it's basically a 5-note scale that is very common in ethnic cultural music all over the world: Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and rock, blues, and jazz. So pentatonic scale. So that whole riff is based on a pentatonic scale, but I have my instrument here, and this instrument, the upright bass, has a certain range. So I don't want to limit myself to just this. So I might practice that scale across the instrument, so I have a larger range to choose from when I improvise. same notes, but in different octaves. So E, 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 E. I have 4 E's there. So now as an improviser, one of the things I'll think about is range. How can I extend my range so I'm not just playing in a very limited sort of palette, so I can play in a larger palette. So when I'm improvising with just those 5 notes, I can add a lot. It's a lot more interesting. There's a lot more color. There's a lot more variation, a lot more that I can get out of the instrument if I've explored my range. Now, there's some technical things that come to mind, because when I try to go up high, I have to be careful because I might be out of tune. The bass is a fretless instrument, so if I'm going to go, I better make sure I can hit that note and not go, it's not quite right. So I may practice just my positions or my shifting. Until I can get it perfect. And so forth and so forth. So I may spend, I'm going to practice. I know that's my improvisation is going to be over this motif. So I practice my range. I may do that for 20 minutes. I may practice my shiftings for 20 minutes. Then I might start to think about what musicians call melodic sequences, which give me sort of little things to jump off. For example, if I'm playing my scale, a simple melodic sequence may be 3 notes, 3-note sequence. So and so forth. So now when I'm improvising, I can draw that out. Or I may choose to do 4-note sequences. And you can see I could go crazy. I could go 5, I could go 6, I could go 7, or I could think of what we would say, roughly speaking, something built on fourths, which are 4th degrees. So I practice that. I practice my 3-note groupings for 5 minutes. I practice my 4-note groupings for 5 minutes. I practice my fourth intervals for 5 minutes. And then I've practiced range, I've practiced intonation, I've practiced 3 notes, 4 notes, intervals, all sorts of things. Now, maybe that's an hour and a half of practice. Now I feel like, okay, I can improvise. I have some things worked out. So when I want to improvise on that riff, I can do so. And hopefully that explains a little bit of what my process as an improvising jazz musician is, sort of preparing for improvisation. Because improvisation is different, as many of you know through dance. It's different than doing something choreographed or doing something composed. Because you know what you're going to do and you go for perfection. But when you're improvising, you don't know. So basically you need to perfect the skills needed to improvise. And that's what jazz musicians do. And that's what I mean when I say when jazz musicians practice improvisation, they rarely improvise, right? We practice those skills. And then when we hit the stage, hopefully we're prepared to express. And maybe with that, I'll just do a little improvisation on that for you and then call it a day. So thanks so much for tuning in. I know DJD has a lot of little live feeds like this planned, so stay tuned, check in. Some of the members of the band for Beautiful Noise, I believe, are gonna do their part and speak up here. I should mention that the members of the band for Beautiful Noise were Karima Ashanti singing, John McCaslin playing the drums, who's been in very many DJD shows, Karsten Rubeling playing the trombone, Bob Tilsley, who's been with DJD for decades on the trumpet, and Raul Tabera, the Cuban percussionist based out of Calgary, and myself on the bass. So that would have been great. You're gonna have to wait till next year to see and hear that. So here's just a little improvisation. Thanks. Take care, everybody.